I have done 30 plus certifications and am here to guide you throughout your certification journey. In this video, we will be covering some important questions of the Microsoft AZ-800 exam. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. To the important questions, question 1. Your network contains a multi-site Active Directory domain services forest. Each Active Directory site is connected by using manually configured site links and automatically generated connections. You need to minimize the convergence time for changes to Active Directory. What should you do? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, for each site link, modify the application schedule. It only adjusts when a replication occurs, not its speed. Then we have B, for each site link, modify the site link costs. It affects route selection but does not speed up replication. Then we have C, create a site link bridge that contains all the site links. It improves routing efficiency, not convergence time. As such, we should, for each site link, modify the options attribute. Thus, the correct option is D. It enables change notification based replication, allowing faster updates between sites instead of waiting for scheduled replication. You cannot lower the replication schedule further down when you configure manual site link replication. Therefore, the only option left is to change the link site option attribute to use notification. D seems to be the correct answer. Question 2. You have an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain that syncs with an Azure AD tenant. You have several Windows 10 devices that are Azure AD hybrid joined. You need to ensure that when users sign into the devices, they can use Windows Hello for Business. Which optional feature should you select in Azure AD Connect? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, group write back. It syncs Azure AD groups to on-premises but is not related to device authentication. Then we have C, Azure AD app and attribute filtering. It controls synced attributes but does not affect authentication methods. Then we have D, password write back. It allows users to reset passwords from Azure AD to on-premises not related to device join. And then we have E, directory extension attribute sync. Syncs custom attributes but does not impact Windows Hello for Business. As such, the optional feature that we should select in Azure AD Connect is device write back. Thus, the correct option is A. Device write back is an optional feature in Azure AD Connect that allows the on-premises ADDS domain to receive information about the Azure AD joined devices, including the device registration state. By enabling this feature, you can ensure that the on-premises ADDS domain has information about the Azure AD joint devices, which is required for Windows Hello for Business to function correctly. Once this information is available in the on-premises ADDS domain, you can set the appropriate policies and configure the required infrastructure to support Windows Hello for Business. Question 3. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest. The forest contains three domains. Each domain contains 10 domain controllers. You plan to store a DNS zone in a custom Active Directory partition. You need to create the Active Directory partition for the zone. The partition must replicate to only 4 of the domain controllers. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. Windows Admin Center manages servers but does not create AD partitions. Then we have B, DNS managers, manages DNS zones but does not handle AD partitions. Then we have C, Active Directory sites and services, manages site replication but does not create partitions. As such, we should use ntdsutil.exe. Thus, the correct option is D. It is used to create and manage custom Active Directory partitions, allowing replication to specific domain controllers. Question 4. You manage a Windows Server 2022 file server that hosts large data files. You need to ensure that files transferred over SMB are compressed to improve network performance. What should you do? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, enable SMB multi-channel. SMB multi-channel increases throughput using multiple network connections but does not compress data. Then we have C, enable branch cache on the server. Branch cache optimizes WAN performance, not SMB file transfers. Then we have D, use Windows Admin Center to configure storage spaces direct. Storage spaces direct is for storage pooling, not for file compression. As such, we should configure SMB compression on the file share. Thus, the correct option is B. SMB compression allows large file transfers to use fewer network resources by reducing the size of the data being transmitted. You can enable this setting at the file share level using PowerShell or Windows Admin Center. Question 5. Your on-premises network contains an Active Directory domain named contoso.com. You have an Azure AD tenant. You plan to sync contoso.com with the Azure AD tenant by using Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. You need to create an account that will be used by Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. Which type of account should you create? Firstly, let us eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, system assigned managed identity. It is used for Azure resources, not for AD synchronization. Then we have C, user. Standard user account lacks the necessary security and automation for sync. Then we have iNet or person, intended for LDAP directories, not Azure AD synchronization. As such, the type of account that we should create is group managed service account. Thus, the correct option is B. Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync requires a GMSA for secure and automated password management when synchronizing on-premises AD with Azure AD. Question 6. You have an on-premises ADDS domain named contoso.com that syncs with Azure AD by using Azure AD Connect. You enable password protection for contoso.com. You need to prevent users from including the word contoso as part of their password. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, Active Directory users and computers. It manages users but does not configure password policies for Azure AD. Then we have C, Synchronization Service Manager. Manages sync operations but does not control password policies. Then we have D, Windows Admin Center. It is used for managing Windows servers, not Azure AD password policies. As such, we should use the Azure AD Admin Center. Thus, the correct option is A. Azure AD password protection policies, including banned words like Contoso, are configured in the Azure AD Admin Center. Question 7. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. You plan to use Active Directory Administrative Center, create a new user named user1. Which two attributes are required to create user1? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, password, not required at creation, can be set later. Then we have B, profile path, optional, used for roaming profiles. Then we have E, first name, not mandatory, only full name is required. Then we have F, user UPN logon, useful but not required. SAM account name is the essential logon attribute. As such, the two attributes that are required to create user 1 are user SAM account name logon and full name. Thus, the correct options are C and D. If directory requires a SAM account name and full name, create a user account. Question 8. You have a Microsoft Entra Domain Services domain named contoso.com. You need to provide an administrator with the ability to manage group policy objects. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. To which group should you add the administrator? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. Azure AD, DC administrators. It manages Microsoft inter-domain services but not GPUs. Then we have B. Domain admins, has full domain control, exceeding least privilege requirements. Then we have C. Schema admins, used for modifying the AD schema, not managing GPUs. And then we have D. Enterprise admins, has forest-wide control, which is excessive for GPU management. As such, the group to which we should add the administrator is group policy creator owners. Thus, the correct option is E. Grants permission to create and modify group policy objects without giving full domain-wide administrative rights following the principle of least privilege. Question 9. You have an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain that syncs with an Azure AD tenant. The domain contains two servers named Server 1 and Server 2. The user named Admin 1 is a member of the local administrators group at Server 1 and Server 2. You plan to manage Server 1 and Server 2 by using Azure Arc. Azure Arc objects will be added to a resource group named RG1. You need to ensure that Admin 1 can configure Server 1 and Server 2 to be managed by using Azure Arc. What should you do first? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. From the Azure portal, generate a new onboarding script. It is required later, but admin 1 needs permissions first. Then we have C. Hybrid Azure AD, join server 1 and server 2. Not required for Azure Arc onboarding. Then we have D. Create an Azure Cloud only account for admin 1. It is unnecessary since admin 1 already exists in ADDS. As such, we should first sign admin 1, the Azure Connected Machine onboarding role for RG1. Thus, the correct option is B. To limit the privilege of a user and only allow them to onboard servers to Azure, the Azure Connected Machine onboarding role is suitable. This role can only be used to onboard servers and cannot re-onboard or delete the server resource. Make sure to review the Azure Arc enabled servers security overview for more information about access controls. Question 10. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that runs Windows Server. You have an Azure subscription that has Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled. You need to ensure that you can use the Azure policy guest configuration feature to manage VM1. What should you do? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. Add the PowerShell desired state configuration extension to VM1. It is used for configuration management but not required for Azure policy guest configuration. Then we have B. Configure VM1 to use a user assigned managed identity. Guest configuration specifically requires a system assigned identity. Then we have D. Add the custom script extension to VM1. It runs scripts but does not support guest configuration policies. As such, we should configure VM1 to use a system assigned managed identity. Thus, the correct option is C. Azure policy guest configuration requires a system assigned managed identity to authenticate and enforce policies on the VM. Question 11. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that has a private IP address only. You configure the Windows Admin Center extensions on VM1. You have an on-premises computer that runs Windows 11. You use the computer for server management. You need to ensure that you can use Windows Admin Center from the Azure portal to manage VM1. What should you configure? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, an Azure Bastion host on the virtual network that contains VM1, provides RDP and SSH access, but not for Windows Admin Center management. Then we have C, private endpoint on the virtual network that contains VM1. It is used for accessing Azure services securely, not for Windows Admin Center management. Then we have D, A network security group rule that allows inbound traffic on port 443. It allows inbound HTTPS traffic but does not ensure access from an on-premises network to the Azure VM. As such, we should configure a VPN connection to the virtual network that contains VM1. Thus, the correct option is B. A VPN connection allows secure communication between the on-premises computer and the Azure virtual network, enabling access to the Windows Admin Center extension on VM1. Question 12, you have an Azure subscription that contains the following resources: an Azure Log Analytics workspace, an Azure automation account, Azure Arc. You have an on-premises server named Server 1 that is onboarded to Azure Arc. You need to manage Microsoft updates on Server 1 by using Azure Arc. Which two actions should you perform? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, from the virtual machine's data source of the Log Analytics workspace, connect Server 1. The step is for monitoring, not for managing updates. Then we have D, add Microsoft Sentinel to the Log Analytics workspace. Microsoft Sentinel is for security operations, not for update management. As such, the two actions that we should perform are: from the automation account, enable update management for server 1, and on server 1, install the Azure Monitor agent. As such, the correct options are A and C. About the options: A. To manage Microsoft updates on server 1 by using Azure Arc, you need to enable update management for the server from the automation account. Azure Arc Update Management enables you to manage updates for your Azure Arc enabled servers from the Azure portal using the same update management solution that you use for Azure VMs. About option C, to enable update management for server 1, you also need to install the Azure Monitor agent on the server. The Azure Monitor agent is a lightweight process that runs your servers and collects performance, event, and diagnostic data and forwards it to Azure Monitor for analysis. This data is used to monitor the performance and health of your servers and to detect and diagnose issues. Question 13. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains a server named Server 1. You implement just enough administration on Server 1. You need to perform remote administration tasks on server by using only JEA. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, remote server administration tools only. Our set is a set of tools but does not work with JEA alone. Then we have C, PowerShell or remote desktop only. JEA doesn't allow remote desktop for administration. Then we have D, PowerShell or remote server administration tools only. Our set is not required. PowerShell is the tool for JEA. Then we have E, our set or remote desktop only. JEA uses PowerShell exclusively. Then we have F, PowerShell, remote server administration tools, or remote desktop. Again, remote desktop and RSET are not applicable for JEA usage. As such, we should use PowerShell only. Thus, the correct option is A. Just enough administration is a PowerShell based security feature that allows fine grained control over administrative tasks. It restricts tasks to predefined roles, and remote administration is performed using PowerShell only. Question 14. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription contains a virtual machine named VM1 that runs Windows Server. You plan to manage VM1 by using a PowerShell runbook. You need to create the runbook. What should you create first? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, an Azure workbook. It is used for data visualization, not for creating or running PowerShell runbooks. Then we have C, a log analytics workspace. It is used for collecting and analyzing log data, but not necessary for creating runbooks. Then we have D, a Microsoft Power Automate flow. It is used for automating workflows, not specifically for running PowerShell scripts in Azure. As such, we should first create an Azure automation account. Thus, the correct option is A. You need to create an Azure automation account first. as it is required to manage and run PowerShell runbooks in Azure. Question 15. You have an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains a member server named server1 that runs Windows Server. You need to ensure that you can manage password policies for the domain from server1. Which command should you run first on server1? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, install Windows feature rset-adrms. It installs tools for managing Active Directory rights management services, not for password policies. Then we have C, install Windows features GPMC. Installs the Group Policy Management Console, which is for managing group policies, not directly for password policies. Then we have D, install Windows feature rset-ad PowerShell. It installs PowerShell CMDlets for AD management, but the correct feature for managing password policies specifically is rset-ad tools. As such, the command that we should run first on server 1 is install Windows feature rset-ad tools. Thus, the correct option is A. This command installs the remote server administration tools for Active Directory, which includes tools for managing password policies and other AD related tasks from server 1. Question 16. You have 50 on premises servers that run Windows Server. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to monitor the on premises servers by using Azure Monitor. You need to collect event logs from the on premises servers. What should you do first? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, from the Azure portal, create a storage account. A storage account is not required for collecting event logs. A log analytics workspace is used for that purpose. When we have C, from the on-premises servers, run Azure Monitor Agent client setup.msi. This installs the monitoring agent, but you must first create the log analytics workspace before installing the agent. Then we have D, from the Azure portal, create a data collection rule in Azure Monitor. DCRs are used for advanced data collection configurations, but the workspace must be created first before setting up DCRs. As such, we should first, from the Azure portal, create a log analytics workspace. Thus, the correct option is B. You need to create a log analytics workspace in Azure to store the event logs collected from the on-premises servers. The workspace is where Azure Monitor gathers and analyzes the data. Question 17. You have a Windows Server container host named Server1 and a container image named Image1. You need to start a container from Image1. The solution must run the container on a Hyper-V virtual machine. Which parameter should you specify when you run the docker run command? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A dash expose. It is used to expose container ports to the host, not for specifying isolation. Then we have B dash privileged. It grants the container additional privileges, but it does not specify Hyper-V isolation. Then we have C dash runtime. It defines the runtime used to start the container, not isolation type. And then we have E dash entry point. It specifies the command that should run inside the container, not related to isolation. As such, the parameter that we should specify when we run the docker run command is dash isolation. Thus, the correct option is D. The dash isolation parameter specifies the isolation mode for the container. To run the container on a Hyper-V virtual machine, you should use dash isolation Hyper-V. Question 18. You plan to deploy a containerized application that requires .NET Core. You need to create a container image for the application. The image must be as small as possible. Which base image should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, Windows Server. It is larger than Nano Server and includes unnecessary components for running .NET Core. Then we have C, Windows. Full Windows image significantly larger than Nano Server. Then we have D, Server Core. Smaller than Windows Server, but still larger than Nano Server, and includes additional components not needed for minimal .NET Core container. As such, the base image that we should use is nano server. Thus, the correct option is B. Nano server base container image. This is our smallest base container image. As mentioned above, this means less APIs available. For Nano server, we focused on scenarios where developers will be writing new applications on which the framework can target the specific APIs of Nano server. Examples of frameworks, languages, or apps that are supported on Nano server are .NET Core. Question 19. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that runs Windows Server. You perform the following actions on VM1. Create a folder named Folder1 on volume C. Create a folder named Folder2 on volume D. Add a new data disk to VM1 and create a new volume that is assigned drive letter E. Install an app named App1 on volume E. You plan to resize VM1. Which objects will be present after you resize VM1? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, folder 1 only. Volume D and folder 2 are on different disks, so resizing does not affect them directly. Then we have C, folder 1 and folder 2 only. Folder 2 is on volume D, which is unaffected by resizing the OS disk. Then we have D, folder 1, folder 2, app 1 and volume E. Folder 2 is not impacted by resizing and is on a separate volume. As such, the objects that will be present after you resize VM1 are folder 1, volume E, and app 1 only. Thus, the correct option is A. When resizing VM1, the following objects will persist. Folder 1 on volume C, persisting data on the OS disk. Volume E, created on the new data disk, will persist as it is a separate disk. App 1 installed on volume E will also persist since it is on the data disk. Question 20. You have a server named Server 1 that hosts Windows containers. You plan to deploy an application that will have multiple containers. Each container will be on the same subnet. Each container requires a separate MAC address and IP address. Each container must be able to communicate by using its IP address. You need to create a Docker network that supports the deployment of the application. Which type of network should you create? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, NAT, uses network address translation where containers share a single IP address and don't get unique IPs or MAC addresses. Then we have C, I2 bridge. This is not a valid Docker network type. Then we have D, I2 tunnel. This is also not a valid Docker network type. As such, the type of network that we should create is transparent. Thus, the correct option is B. A transparent network mode allows containers to share the same subnet as the host. Each container gets its own MAC address and IP address, enabling direct communication between containers using their individual IP addresses. Question 21. You have an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain that syncs with an Azure AD tenant. You plan to deploy 100 new Azure virtual machines that will run Windows servers. You need to ensure that each new virtual machine is joined to the ADDS domain. What should you use? What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, a group policy object. GPOs are used to manage configurations on domain joined machines, not for automating domain joining during VM deployment. Then we have C, Azure AD Connect. It is used for syncing on-premises AD to Azure AD, but not for joining VMs to an ADDS domain. Then we have D, an Azure Management Group. It is used for organizing Azure subscriptions, not for joining VMs to an ADDS domain. As such, we should use an Azure Resource Manager template. Thus, the correct option is A. An Azure Resource Manager template can be used to automate the deployment of Azure virtual machines and configure them to join the on-premises ADDS domain during the deployment process. Question 22. You have an Azure virtual machine named Server 1 that runs a network management application. Server 1 has the following network configurations: network interface, NIC1, IP address 10.1.1.1/24 connected to VNet1 slash subnet 1. You need to connect server 1 to an additional subnet named VNet1 slash subnet 2. What should you do? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. Modify the IP configurations of an IC1. You cannot add multiple subnets to a single network interface. A new interface is needed. Then we have B. Add an IP configuration to an IC1. A single network interface can only be connected to one subnet at a time. Adding an IP configuration won't enable connection to another subnet. Then we have D. Create a private endpoint on subnet 2. Private endpoints are for accessing Azure services privately, not for connecting VMs to additional subnets. As such, we should add a network interface to server 1. Thus, the correct option is C. To connect server 1 to an additional subnet, you need to add another network interface to the virtual machine and assign it to VNet1 slash subnet 2. Each subnet must have its own network interface for the VM. Question 23. Your on-premises network has an IP address range of 10.0.0.0/23. You have an Azure virtual network named VNet1 that contains a virtual machine named VM1. VNet1 has an IP address range of 10.0.1.0/24. You need to deploy a site-to-site VPN to connect on-premises network to VNet1. What should you do first? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A. Deploy Azure Bastion to VNet1. Azure Bastion is used for secure RDP/SSH access to VMs, not for configuring VPNs. Then we have B. Deploy Azure Extended Network. There is no service called Azure Extended Network. VPN and network configuration need to be adjusted manually. Then we have D. Configure VNet1 to use an IP address range of 10.0.1.128/25. This still falls within the original range and will overlap with the on-premises network. As such, we should first configure VNet1 to use the IP address range of 10.0.2.0/24. Thus, the correct option is C. To establish a site-to-site VPN between the on-premises network and the Azure virtual network, the IP address ranges must not overlap. Changing VNet1's address range to 10.0.2.0/24 ensures there is no conflict with the on-premises IP address range. Question 24. You have a Windows Server container host named Server1. You create a Docker file named df1. You need to generate a container image by using df1. Which command should you run? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B. Docker exec. It runs commands in a running container but does not build images. Then we have C. Docker create. It creates a container from an existing image but does not build an image. Then we have D. Docker images. It lists existing images but does not build them. As such, the command that we should run is docker build. Thus, the correct option is A. The docker build command is used to build a container image from a Docker file, in this case df1. Question 25. You have an on-premises network that is connected to an Azure virtual network by using a site-to-site VPN. Each network contains a subnet that has the same IP address space. The on-premises subnet contains a virtual machine. You plan to migrate the virtual machine to the Azure subnet. You need to migrate the on-premises virtual machine to Azure without modifying the IP address. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you implement before you perform the migration? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B. Azure Virtual Network NAT. Network address translation is for managing the IP address translation but it does not help with maintaining the same IP address for migration. Then we have C, Azure Application Gateway. An application gateway is used for load balancing and routing traffic to applications, not for IP address management during VM migration. Then we have D, Azure Virtual Network Peering. Peering connects to virtual networks but does not directly address the requirement of migrating the VM with the same IP address. As such, we could implement Azure Extended Network before performing the migration. Thus, the correct option is A. This allows you to extend your on-premises network to Azure and allows the virtual machine to retain its IP address during the migration. It also allows for minimal administrative effort as it does not require additional configuration on the virtual machine or the on-premises network. Question 26, you have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that runs Windows Server. You need to configure the management of VM1 to meet the following requirements. Require administrators to request access to VM1 before establishing a remote desktop connection. Limit access to VM1 from specific source IP addresses. Limit access to VM1 to a specific management port. What should you configure? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have a network security group. It can control traffic but does not support JIT access or access requests. And we have B, Azure AD, privileged identity management. It manages role assignments but not JIT access for RDP or port restrictions. Then we have D, Azure front door. It is used for load balancing and web apps, not for VM access control. Thus, we should configure Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Thus, the correct option is C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud allows you to configure just-in-time access to virtual machines, which requires administrators to request access before establishing a remote desktop connection. It also provides options to limit access based on source IP addresses and restrict management to specific ports. Question 27. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains 10 servers that run Windows Server. The servers have static IP addresses. You plan to use DHCP to assign IP addresses to the servers. You need to ensure that each server always receives the same IP address. Which type of identifier should you use to create a DHCP reservation for each server? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, NetBIOS name. It is not used for DHCP reservations. NetBIOS names are for network identification, not IP assignment. Then we have C, fully qualified domain name. FQDN is used for identifying resources on a network but not for DHCP reservations. Then we have D, universally unique identifier. It is not applicable for DHCP reservations. It is used for uniquely identifying devices, but not in DHCP. As such, the type of identifier that we should use is MAC address. Thus, the correct option is B. To ensure that each server always receives the same IP address, you should create DHCP reservation based on the MAC address of each server. The DHCP server uses the MAC address to identify and assign the same IP address to the server every time. Question 28, you have an on-premises server named Server 1 that runs Windows Server. You have an Azure Virtual Network that contains an Azure Virtual Network Gateway. You need to connect only Server 1 to the Azure Virtual Network. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, site-to-site VPN. It is used for connecting entire networks to Azure, not just a single server. Then we have C, an express route circuit. It is a dedicated private connection for entire networks, not designed for single server connections. And then we have D, Azure Extended Network. It is typically used to extend on-premises networks into Azure, but not for connecting a single server. As such, we should use Azure Network Adapter. Thus, the correct option is B. Azure Network Adapter. Point-to-site VPN connections are useful when you want to connect to your virtual network from a remote location, such as a branch office, store, or other location. You can also use Azure Network Adapter instead of site-to-site VPN when you require only a few servers to connect to a virtual network. Azure Network Adapter connections don't require a VPN device or a public-facing IP address. Question 29. You have an on-premises server named Server 1 that runs Windows Server. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet 1. You need to connect Server 1 to VNet 1 by using Azure Network Adapter. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have A, the Azure portal. It is used for managing Azure resources, but not for configuring Azure Network Adapter on on-premises servers. Then we have B, Azure AD Connect. It is used for syncing on-premises Active Directory with Azure AD, not for network adapter configuration. Then we have C, Device Manager. It is used for managing hardware devices on a server, not for Azure network configurations. As such, we should use Windows Admin Center. Thus, the correct option is D. Using Azure Network Adapter to connect to a virtual network requires the following: an Azure account with at least one active subscription, an existing virtual network, internet access for the target servers that you want to connect to the Azure virtual network, a Windows Admin Center connection to Azure, the latest version of Windows Admin Center. Question 30. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest. The forest contains three domains. Each domain contains 10 domain controllers. You plan to store a DNS zone in a custom Active Directory partition. You need to create the Active Directory partition for the zone. The partition must replicate to only four of the domain controllers. What should you use? Firstly, let's eliminate the incorrect options. We have B, Active Directory sites and services. It is used for managing site replication and AD components, but not for creating DNS partitions. Then we have C, Set DNS server. PowerShell CMD for configuring DNS server settings, but does not create custom Active Directory partitions for DNS zones. And then we have D, New AD object. It is used to create generic Active Directory objects, not specifically for DNS partitions. As such, we should use dnscmd.exe. Thus, the correct option is A. The dnscmd.exe tool is used to manage DNS server configurations, including creating DNS zones in custom Active Directory partitions with specific replication settings. These were all the questions for this video. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. We will be publishing more parts to this series in the future, so please make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.